Spoiler warning, this video will contain major spoilers from the latest Marvel movie, Spider-Man No Way Home. You have been warned. If you have not watched the movie yet, click off this video right now. This is your final warning. Now with that being said, hello and welcome to WhyZ, and today we're going to talk about a very exciting event concerning the likes of No Way Home, which essentially is a culmination of the Homecoming trilogy, and now a Spider-Boy is becoming a Spider-Man for real. I'm going to make a lot of different videos talking about the various nitty-gritties of the things, how the stories of the other Spider-Man who visited the Earth of MCU is going to affect the future of the series. But for now, we have a very exciting topic at hand, because now it seems like due to the shenanigans of time travel, we have a very unique situation at hand wherein we get to see the birth of new timelines, new totally different timelines. And as you can see in the title of the video, these are at least 7 timelines. I know that there might be more, there might be even 8 to 10 timelines actually, but I'm going to get to that in the later half of this video. But for now, let's focus on the main 7 timelines which are explored or sort of hinted towards in this movie right out of the bat. So without any further ado, thank you so much for joining in. But before that, if you're new here, then please consider subscribing to our channel, since I do weekly videos on a number of different topics. With that being said, let's just jump into it. So right out of the bat, let's talk about the 2 other Spider-Man which visited the MCU Earth, that is Andrew Garfield's version of the Amazing Spider-Man and of course Tobey Maguire's original Sam Raimi series Spider-Man. Now that's all fine and everything, but along with them the issue actually arrives here because the villains from these respective movies are picked up from different instances or different time frames from the very same timeline. It's essentially the same timeline but different instances of time, which according to the words of Peter 2 and Peter 3, they have actually lived through all of these experiences. These are not affecting their timeline, but at the same time, after the ending of No Way Home, wherein they are quote unquote cured, this is going to give rise to a very peculiar scenario. Now, this is obviously a little bit confusing, and that's why I'll try my best to explain what is exactly going on here in this video. But as you all know, time travel is always a very slippery rope. That's why a lot of the franchises try to avoid the shenanigans which are obviously involved here. Despite everyone's best efforts, there's always going to be some sort of a plot hole or some sort of a paradox which is created because of all of these things. There are various different entities like the butterfly effect, the grandfather's paradox, and all of these other shenanigans. So the MCU right out of Endgame tried to address all of these things by saying that, okay, we are not going the route of Back to the Future. That is not happening here. Professor Hulk explicitly states in that movie that if you are attempting to go back into the past and do something there, it's not going to inherently affect your future, your current future from wherein you arrived into the past, but rather it's sort of going to create a branch timeline, a different timeline, and this new past of yours is now going to be the new future. It's again a little bit confusing, but the Loki series I feel like did a very good comprehension of this entire concept, wherein they showcase to us what exactly is the sacred timeline and the branches of the sacred timeline, and how because of some form of a nexus event, a branch in a timeline is actually created wherein an alternate reality, an alternate timeline is actually created. It's solely because of this reason that we actually get to see the various different incarnations of Loki in the MCU Loki series. And yet again, this concept is explored in the Marvel What If series, wherein even one particular plot point or one particular element changes or creates a butterfly effect, creates a ripple effect, wherein everything can change. This was the basis behind the What If series, and taking in cues from all of these things which have been set up so far into the series, into the entirety of MCU, from Endgame to Loki to What If, I think that we have a pretty conclusive evidence and scenario to see why there are at least 7 new timelines which are appearing at the end of No Way Home. There might be more. Again, as I'm saying, the reality of fabric actually broke and we got to see some very peculiar characters, but I'm going to talk about that later on, so stay tuned for that. But for now, let's begin with the obvious ones. we have the current continuity of the MCU wherein Tom Holland's Peter Parker, or rather let's say Peter 1, is actually residing, and here he resorts to take the help of Doctor Strange because his identity has been revealed by Mysterio, and that is causing a lot of troubles in his personal as well as professional life. And because of his association, his friends are also not getting into MIT. So that is one of the major reasons why he goes to seek for help from Doctor Strange. Now again, the reasoning behind all of these things are not the most solid. It's probably one of the weakest parts of the movie, but it is what it is. This is the first timeline. Now after this, we get to see Doctor Strange casting his spell, but because of the constant meddlings by Peter Parker, this spell is actually botched. And this gives rise to a very dangerous predicament wherein characters from various different universes, characters from various different timelines are actually pouring in currently into this timeline, and this includes a lot of villains as well as the prior Spider-Man, that is Peter 2 and Peter 3, in the form of Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield. Now this is clear so far. This is the first timeline, this is the second timeline, and this is the third timeline. But the problem arrives with the villains. Now Tobey's Spider-Man is already an old version of a Spider-Man who has been through a lot, who has fought numerous different battles, and he's someone who obviously remembers all the events which happened in Spider-Man 1, 2 and 3. He has been through all of them. He has fought the Green Goblin, the original Green Goblin. He has fought Dr. Octopus. He has fought his friend Harry, who became the new Green Goblin, and along with all of that, he also fought off against Venom. At the same time, we are also given some hints about his relationship with MJ, or rather Mary Jane here, and even though I sort of expected him to showcase his wedding ring, it didn't really happen, but at the same time he says that he's trying to build his relationship. They have had some rough patches here and there, but they are working towards it. It's pretty much implied that quite a lot of time has actually gone by. He has a sore back. He has been doing this superhero stuff for a very, very long time. And the same goes for Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker as well. After the death of his girlfriend Gwen Stacy, Peter really broke down emotionally, and he was still grieving from the events which happened back then. He never really could forgive himself for what actually happened, and although he sort of gets his redemption here in this particular movie, but this Peter Parker says that after a while he stopped pulling his punches, and I really want to see what happened back then. But anyway, again, a lot of time has actually passed. Maybe not a lot in comparison to Tobey Maguire, but still some time has actually passed. And now coming to the villains, this is where the problems actually start to arrive. We get to see Willem Dafoe's Norman Osborn, or rather Green Goblin, who appears alive. He's not actually dead. It seems like somehow he was picked off right before he actually was killed off, because he still knows the true identity of Peter. And he is not dead yet, so of course it happens sometimes during the events of Spider-Man 1 before his eventual death. And the same goes for Dr. Octopus as well. In the first parts of the movie, Dr. Octopus is acting fully as a villain because he did not have his redemption yet. He knows who Peter Parker is, but he only remembers up until a certain point, that is before he actually died while taking down his own nuclear reactor. The same goes for Sandman as well. Sandman knows the identity of Peter Parker, but he was picked off at a different point of time, but it is all from the same continuity, the continuity which Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker has already lived through. Now coming to Andrew Garfield's era, this is Kurt Connors, who actually knows the identity of Peter Parker, but he was picked off before he actually died. That's fine, but again a problem arises with Electro, because in the actual movie, that is Amazing Spider-Man 2, Electro knows the true identity of Peter, but here in No Way Home, we get to see that Electro didn't actually knew the true identity of Peter. He was expecting maybe a black guy from Queens, which is an obvious nod towards Miles Morales, but again I'm gonna talk about that separately later on. But either way, it seems like he's also from the same continuity, but there is something which is different here. Of course, his getup is different, and he does not know the true identity of Peter. Now here, two things can actually happen. Either this is a totally separate continuity. It's fine. I believe that it can be possible that a similar yet different timeline actually existed. We know that there are a lot of variants possible, but here in the movie it is sort of implied by the wordings of Dr. Connors that it is the same universe, but his appearance changed because of some intergalactic travel, some shenanigans which were involved into the way. But either way, for the sake of simplicity, let's assume that he's the same guy, he's the same Electro from the Amazing Spider-Man 2 timeline, but he was picked off before he gets to know the true identity of Peter Parker. So that's fine and all, Now you might be wondering that how these are 7 different timelines. Well, I'm coming to that. Because the major reason why these things are going to create separate timelines involves the explanation which was given to us by Professor Hulk himself. Changing the past is not going to change a person's current future, it's just going to create a branch timeline. And that is exactly what is going to happen here. Because towards the end of No Way Home, Tom Holland's Peter Parker actually tries to save and cure all of these villains, and he did not want all of them to die, and now this creates a very exciting predicament. Now of course it's not sure that all of them are actually quote unquote cured, all of them will magically stop being evil. That is not actually the question here. But the main point remains here that these 5 villains, they know that they are about to die, and they will most likely not do what they were initially doing in the part of the movie. That is, most likely William Dafoe's Green Goblin or William Dafoe's Norman Osborn has been cured now. Therefore, he's not going to act in accordance to the events of Spider-Man 1. He's not going to be impaled by his own glider. He's going to properly take care of Harry, and since he obviously knows the identity of Peter Parker, he's probably going to help Peter as well. So it creates a totally different branch of a timeline. The same goes for Alfred Molina's Dr. Octopus as well. Doc Ock has been properly cured now, his chip has been restored, he does not need to take part in his redemption arc, and therefore he's not going to drown and kill himself. So therefore, 2 different timelines already created. So far we have Tom Holland's original timeline, then we have Andrew Garfield's original timeline, and then Tobey Maguire's original timeline. These are 3 timelines. The 4th timeline will be where Norman Osborn or Green Goblin has been cured and he's not becoming a villain anymore. That is the 4th timeline. It is going to take place separately from the original timeline of Tobey Maguire, because we have to remember here that Tobey has been through all of these things. He has the recollection of his memories, which involves his fights with Green Goblin, his fights with Venom, his fights with Harry Osborn, his fights with Dr. Octopus. So that is a totally separate timeline. Dr. Octopus and Green Goblin returning to their respective timelines is not going to affect Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker in any way possible. Therefore, it is going to create branch timelines or alternate timelines, whichever one you want to call them off. So far, we can already see 4 and a 5th timeline which involves Dr. Octopus. Now the 6th one is going to be Sandman's timeline. He's also going to have the same consequences as the other 2 villains, although his timeline won't be a lot different, but since it's going to contain even a minor specter of difference from the main timeline of Tobey Maguire, so it's going to be counted as a branch timeline. We already know about this from the What If series. Now one quick note, I'm including Tom Holland's original timeline, that is this MCU timeline, as one timeline. This is not exactly new timeline, so far you could say that these only are 5 new timelines plus 1 original timeline, just to keep everything clear. But still, for the sake of the count, I think that we should include all of these things. Now the next one will involve Andrew Garfield. In a similar fashion to Tobey Maguire, he originally lived through the events of Amazing Spider-Man 1 and Amazing Spider-Man 2, but now with Dr. Connors being cured and returning to the timeline, it's most possible that Gwen's father is not going to be killed, so it's going to create a new timeline, and the same goes for Elektra as well. So these are the definitive new 7 timelines which have been created at the end of Spider-Man No Way Home. But even then, that is not actually all. It's very much possible that there are more branch timelines which have actually been created, as we saw with how the space-time continuum was actually ripping apart, and how we get to see the silhouettes of a lot of characters actually, including some who looked actually like Kang the Conqueror. It's going to be interesting nonetheless to see the future of what exactly unfolds for Spider-Man and MCU. And lastly, if we are actually getting more specific, I think that we could quantify another 8 timeline which happened in front of our very own eyes, and that is the events which happened at the end of Spider-Man No Way Home. That is, Peter made a choice. He made the choice of the world forgetting his name. If we go by the logic of What If, this creates a branching timeline. One timeline wherein Peter Parker accepts this reality, accepts his fate, that his secret identity has been revealed now, so he cannot do anything about it. He cannot go to MIT and his loved ones are going to suffer for that. But he chose not to take that risk. He chose the second path. He chose the path wherein his identity is no more revealed because of the spell which was casted by Doctor Strange. In a way, technically speaking, you could say that this is an 8th new timeline which has been actually created. But let me know your thoughts about this. Do you actually believe that this should be counted as a new timeline, or am I just thinking too much? I want to know the opinion of you guys, so let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. So this is it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up if you like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more. Join the channel membership for some very cool perks and features. Join the Discord server for more. I'll see you all on the next one.